Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar to learn more about ERA's newest funding opportunity, the Technology Tailings Challenge. My name is Isabella Tarasco, the Technology Investment Lead with Emissions Reduction Alberta. Today, I'm joined by Justin Riemer, ERA's Chief Executive Officer, and Christophe Owttrim, ERA's Executive Director of Technology and Innovation. Thank you for joining us. As most of you know, 2 weeks ago, we announced the Tailings Technology Challenge. Funding calls like this take months of planning, engagement, and collaboration with our partners in the private and public sectors. We are excited to host you here today to dive a little bit deeper into the call. Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to start by going through a few housekeeping items. First of all, everyone's microphone is muted to avoid unintentional background noise. If you encounter technical challenges related to the webinar connection, please email Kevin at kduncan@eralberta.ca and we'll do our best to help you out. However, if you can't resolve your technical issues or if you need to leave early, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website. It will be uploaded on our webpage for the Tailings Technology Challenge, which is linked off of our technology funding page. The recording will include both the presentation and the live Q&A with audio. It will also include the webinar slides. It's usually updated within 24 hours or so, but please check back in about a day. We will also share it on our social media channels and our newsletter. Speaking of Q&A, in the top right corner of your screen, you'll notice a question mark icon. Clicking this will open a side panel where you can type your questions. Please do not enter your questions into the comments section. In terms of an agenda for today, we have 1 hour together. First, Justin will talk briefly about ERA and our mandate. Next, Chris will provide an overview of the call. We'll cover some key points regarding scope and eligibility, the submission process, and the timelines around the funding decision. And finally, we'll end off by answering some of your questions. We'll try and get to as many questions as we can, but if we don't address your question, you're welcome to follow up with us afterwards. So with that, I will pass it over to Justin to get us started.
Thanks very much, Isabella. Hello, everyone, and I'm happy to speak to you about ERA and the impactful work that we do. So since 2009, we've invested the proceeds from Alberta's industrial carbon price on large emitters to reduce emissions and strengthen the competitiveness of new and existing industries in our province. Our funding is sourced from organizations that are required to meet their emissions through regulated targets under the Government of Alberta's tier regulation. And we offer a clear line of sight from these funds to the investments in the technology solutions needed to help achieve emission reductions and economic growth. Our vision is for Alberta to have competitive industries that deliver sustainable environmental outcomes and attract investment. Most importantly, we are looking at projects and technologies with environmental benefits beyond just GHG reductions. That includes improved water management, soil remediation, reduced land use or disturbance, and the reduction of other air pollutants. And we will do this all with lean, low-cost administration, providing good value to Albertans. So we do receive our funding through the tier fund, as mentioned. The fund is sourced from those large emitters and the GHG emissions. The tier fund is the cornerstone of Alberta's climate strategy. Its support from the government of Alberta is critical to ERA, but ERA does receive funding as well from the federal government for some energy efficiency incentive programs as well. We're strongly aligned to the government of Alberta's priorities, advancing key areas like carbon removals, materials advancement, artificial intelligence, hydrogen development, and other sectors of interest. Having a diverse portfolio in terms of timelines and technologies and sectors. You'll see here that our investments largely align with the largest sources of emission in Alberta, like the oil sands, electricity, and transportation. The oil sands, as you can imagine, are the largest part of the portfolio, and several important projects have reached completion, including solvents, efficiency improvements, and methane reduction technologies in this sector. Tailings and water solutions represent a subset of the larger oil sands portfolio. We've provided almost $70 million to 20 projects in the tailings and mine water space. While the groundwork is in place, it's time to build on it. And that's what this call is meant to do. This call is designed to fund the scale up, piloting, and real world deployment of the most promising solutions. A call focused on funding technologies that treat oil sands waste and water more affordably, effectively, and at scale. a call for technology developers, researchers, and industry leaders with bold ideas and practical solutions. It's about maintaining our leadership, remaining competitive, and tackling complex problems head on. Lastly, for me, commercialization is the bridge that transforms innovative ideas and research into practical, marketable solutions. It encourages continuous improvement and adaptation, ensuring that technologies evolve to meet real world solutions. 75 completed ERA projects have reached commercialization to date, with the largest proportion of those commercialized projects in the oil and gas conventional industry. These commercialized technologies contribute significantly to economic growth by creating new industries and job opportunities. Successful commercialization attracts investment both from the public and the private sector, fueling further economic activity. By supporting and investing in these clean tech projects, ERA helps ensure that groundbreaking technologies reach their full potential. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chris to speak more about the challenge.
Thanks very much, Justin and Isabella. I'm really pleased that we're here together today to talk about ERA's newest call for proposals. So let's get into why we're launching this new funding opportunity, the Tailings Technology Challenge. At its core, what this program is about, and what Justin just said, is that we want to see technologies that reduce the use of fresh water in oil sands operations, support safer ways to manage and treat water, and reduce cleanup costs, accelerate land reclamation, and support more responsible and cost-effective site closures. So why this focus area and why now? It's no secret that tailings and oil sands mine produced water are a major issue for Alberta to tackle. Our current tailings ponds inventory contains more than 1.4 billion cubic meters of tailings and affected water. And this is one of the most complex environmental challenges facing the province with serious ecological and social implications. So we need to get this right. As Justin said, ERA has already allocated nearly $70 million to 20 tailings and water related projects to date. So this is not a new area for us, but we know that the job's not done and there's more support needed to help technologies advance to that fully commercialized state. So now is the time for additional investment aimed to improve and deploy both new and existing technology solutions in this critical area. The Government of Alberta is committed to collaborating with industry, researchers, and Indigenous communities to develop long-term and practical solutions. And our challenge aligns with the release of the province's Oil Sands Mine Water Steering Committee recommendations. And if you've had a chance to read that document, you know that there's quite a number of recommendations that are all looking to advance our solutions in this area. The initial committee recommendations that ERA focuses on in particular are focused largely on improving water use efficiency, developing new measurement standards, and better managing or even reducing water accumulation and volumes held at mine sites. And so we'll be discussing this in more detail as we move through the presentation today, but you can rest assured that the timing of this call is no accident and that we are very well aligned with the Oil Sands Mine Water Committee's recommendations. So I'll start with everyone's favorite topic, the funding available. With this challenge, ERA is making up to $50 million available for projects, with up to $15 million invested per project. These larger funding dollars are intended for exceptionally strong projects that involve multiple operators and have significant outcomes potential. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a minimum funding request of $1 million, again reflecting the scale of solutions and projects we're targeting. If your project is at an earlier scale or a smaller scale in terms of budget, there are other funding mechanisms available both from ERA and from other funders in the ecosystem. As is always the case, ERA will only match contributions towards eligible expenses on a one-to-one basis. And we are always interested in working in partnership with other funders, both in Alberta and across Canada. So in some cases, there may be an opportunity for us to share your proposal with trusted partners of ours to leverage the possibility for additional funding for those organizations. And again, when you get to that part of the application, I encourage you to give us permission by checking the box so that we can share your proposal with other interested funders. As with all of our competitions, there's a certain eligibility requirements for both applicants and projects that may be eligible. So who should apply and who's eligible under this call? So I will say that compared to some of our recent funding announcements that you may have listened to us on, this call is very targeted. And again, as Justin said, it's very much focused on advancing and improving solutions for tailings and oil sands mine water. So this call is open to all classes of applicant, in particular oil sands operators with tailings ponds and or tailings mine water under management. If you are a different class of applicant, whether that's an SME, a research organization, a community, or any other type of applicant, you can still apply, but you must have a firm commitment from one of those operators to participate in your project in a meaningful way. The reason we're imposing that requirement is really for the key reason that we know that ultimately the responsibility for managing these waste streams lies with industry, and it will be industry that has to ultimately invest in the full commercial projects to manage this issue. Because of that, partnerships, while not always necessary for projects, in particular, we think would present a strong value proposition in this call. So, regardless of what type of applicant you are, I do want to encourage all projects to consider consortiums that include Alberta's post secondary and research institutions, Indigenous communities, and municipalities where appropriate, because these partnerships can help attract and retain highly skilled workers, increase Alberta's innovation capacity, engage local communities, and ensure appropriate consultation, and leverage complementary resources. And so you will have seen, if you look at the criteria for this call, that we do assess the quality of the consortium and the engagement that is being done on your project. So the better foot forward you can put in terms of your consortium and the partnerships that you've engaged, the more likely your project is to be selected for funding. Now we'll get into everybody's other favorite topic, which is the technology examples that we think might represent strong opportunities for funding under this program. I will say this call for proposals, like all of our calls for proposals, is not technology prescriptive. And I'll say on behalf of ERA, we know that we don't know every single technology solution that might be out there. What we encourage is folks to bring forward ideas that align with the intended outcomes of the call and make the case for why your technology fits. A lot of the work we've done, as Isabella said, in the months leading up to the launch of this call is really related to engaging with technology developers, researchers, and industry to understand the technology landscape that's out there. And so the list of examples that I'm about to share with you is driven by that engagement, but again, does not represent a comprehensive list of all the technologies that might be a fit. So please keep that in mind. So when you go into the call guidelines, you're going to see these technology examples broken out in greater detail, but I'll go over them in a summary right here. So first up, we're looking at tailings dewatering and volume reduction solutions. So this could include things like novel centrifuge and filtration systems, advanced or passive evaporation techniques that harness lower energy processes to treat water, extraction of additional bitumen or other value-added materials from tailing streams, and management and conversion of air pollutant releases from tailings ponds. We also are open to upstream technology solutions that reduce the volume of tailings or produced water produced. But again, there's a fine line there between a technology that really focuses on things like bitumen extraction, which is out of scope, versus reduced volumes of produced waste streams, which is in scope. So I really encourage folks to contact our applications team to help navigate some of those gray areas. Another area that's really important to this call is water treatment optimization and volume reduction. And so that could include novel filtration, separation, or membrane technologies, advanced oxidation or electrochemical treatments, water recovery or reuse solutions that really bring a holistic focus to how water is used on site, novel treatment and permanent disposal solutions for water treatment byproducts and non-releasable waste streams, and bioaugmentation and other similar approaches to treat contaminants such as naphthenic acids. Going back to the tailings side, the remediation and reclamation is, again, a very important area. So things like photo remediation, micro-remediation, or other advanced techniques for land remediation and reclamation. Other nature-based solutions for remediation and accelerated renaturalization are also in scope. And last but not least, there's a broad category of things that we'll refer to as enabling solutions for tailings and water management. So this could include monitoring solutions that can handle the high volumes and harsh conditions of monitoring tailings and water quality, novel approaches to quantify and monitor naphthenic acid content at various points in the process, biomarkers and other approaches to track, measure, and optimize reclamation progress, and shared infrastructure for testing of tailings and or water management technologies. One thing that I want to highlight for you that's different than some of our other funding calls is that proposals in this competition may focus on a single technology, whether on this list or not, or could be focused on a bundle of technologies that all contribute to advancing an overall comprehensive solution. And so again, we know that various technology developers and operators have well-developed solutions already that they're working on. And if you're looking to put forward a proposal for a number of initiatives that would help move those technologies closer to commercialization or to that next phase of scale up, that's very much an eligible proposal under this call. Out-of-scope technologies are also important to talk about. What we really want to stress with all of our funding calls, and again, this one is no different, is that we are not looking to fund business as usual technologies or solutions. So in the context of tailings remediation, that includes things like just building additional storage facilities, dikes, ponds, dams, and all of the above. Similarly, we're not looking for technologies that are primarily related to bitumen extraction, which I mentioned already. We're also not looking to fund standalone pre-construction studies. So any work that has to be done in the project ultimately needs to culminate with capital in the ground and operation of equipment and technologies to demonstrate their performance. So paper studies, while they can be part of a broader project, are not eligible as a standalone exercise. I will say, if you're uncertain about whether your technology is a fit or your project is a fit, please ask us in the Q&A. Likely we won't be able to get to all those questions, so you're more than welcome to reach out to our applications team, and we're always very happy to have an upfront conversation with you about whether your project may align. The last thing I'll say before we move to the next slide is that a problem that we've seen with many of our calls is that folks may inadvertently opt out of applying based on either the technology examples list that we provided or this list of out of scope technologies. Again, our programs are designed to be flexible and open to a wide range of innovation that can come forward. And so the best thing you can do if you're unsure whether you should apply is to come talk to our team. Now, Justin alluded to this already, but the stage of development that we're looking at in this call is really related to technologies that are moving up that commercialization readiness pathway towards full commercial scale. So the types of projects that you might be eligible to submit under this competition include field tests and pilots, where the technology or innovation is ready to be field tested in an operational environment, and you need to scale up your prototypes to representative scale and subsequently test them in field or with appropriate samples provided by an operator. At the next stage of readiness, we are also open to commercial demonstrations, which we define as technologies or innovations that are approaching the final commercial product and have representative scale systems. Projects in this category may demonstrate the technology at near or full commercial scale in an operational environment. And last but certainly not least, and something we're very open to and would be excited to see under this call, would be first of kind commercial implementation projects. At this stage, the technology is ready for first of kind deployment, and the design, construction, operation of the technology in its final commercial form will be the focus of the project. Typically, these projects don't end at the end of the trial period. They'll often focus on the intent to operate that technology for its full commercial life. And so they really represent that first of a kind implementation. In terms of project structure and timelines, we had a lot of feedback from this in our engagement sessions, and so we're happy to offer some flexible timelines for the projects funded under this call. All projects must commence within 120 days of approval, and I'll get to when that approval will be in just 2 slides. But applicants that are successful may request a delayed start date for their projects of up to 12 months. This is a deliberate measure we've introduced to ensure that projects can align with planned facility turnaround times, as well as budgeting cycles for operators, which we know operate on these longer timescales. In terms of project length, the maximum length for implementation of the project is 3 years, but we can see that augmented by a minimum of 1 year and in fact, up to 3 years of operational time where applicable to generate performance data and lessons learned. This is really important for tailings technologies that are going to be operating on a seasonal basis, and so you may need multiple years of data collection to understand the performance of the technology. Again, we can be quite flexible when it comes to these project timelines. While we don't want to see an open-ended research program proposed that lasts for a decade or more, if your project is somewhere around 3 years and you're looking for some flexibility from us or some clarity on what those timelines should look like, again, please come talk to us. In terms of the submission and evaluation process, this is a little bit of a deviation from our normal calls, and so I would like to underline this slide for you. In this call, because of the narrow focus and the volume of applications we're expecting, we are going to implement a truncated review and adjudication process for eligible projects. So first, we'll accept submissions from all interested applicants. We'll review those submissions in a rigorous competitive process to establish a short list of strong opportunities. If you're on that short list, you'll be invited to a second stage of the program where you'll be invited to pitch or present to our expert review panel and may be subjected to additional due diligence as well. This is in contrast to our regular proposal process where we actually have 2 separate proposals that go through increasing stages of detail as you move through the process. What this allows us to do is it allows us to take you from your submission to a final decision by our board of directors in a much shorter time frame so we can get these funds allocated and get these great projects underway. Of course, I'll flag that all final funding decisions in this competition, like all of our funding calls, will be made by our board of directors. So the timelines for the call, well, we've launched the call and we're currently accepting applications. That intake process will be open until September 24th, 2025. At that point, we have our application submission deadline and no proposals will be accepted after that date if they're submitted late. We will notify applicants if you're on the short list by late October of 2025, so just a little bit over a month later, and we'll invite you to present in early December 2025, culminating with a decision by our board by the end of the year and a notification early in the new year. From there, we'll be looking to negotiate a contribution agreement with all successful applicants that will cover the project scope, work plan, milestones, deliverables, performance target, reporting requirements, and other terms of funding related to ERA's contribution to the project. More on that for folks that are shortlisted. Another really important area for this competition and for many of our other funding calls is that we do have outcomes reporting and knowledge sharing requirements. Recipients of ERA funding are required to produce a final outcomes report that is shared publicly to help advance technologies towards commercialization. We've heard loud and clear that there's not a need to compete in this area for operators. We want the entire industry to benefit from great solutions that come forward and are advanced through this call. What that can look like is reporting on project outcomes, achievements, and lessons learned, such as the emissions reductions and other environmental benefits, job creation, and other economic and social benefits that may arise from the projects. You may also be required to confidentially share data with ERA, but a lot of the reporting that's required is public and is not intended to be commercially sensitive. There are also scenarios where ERA may require recipients to commit to specific activities such as knowledge sharing workshops, participation in ERA lessons learned activities, and other knowledge sharing initiatives. For this call, ERA anticipates that all funded projects will participate in meaningful engagement and information sharing with regulators, First Nations communities, and other relevant stakeholders. Again, this is a challenge that is not going to be solved by technology alone, and we are looking for applicants to present comprehensive solutions that consider all of these attributes when requesting funding. Proponents are strongly encouraged to include consultation and knowledge sharing elements in their project plan, and we do reserve the right to impose additional requirements on applicants as necessary to ensure that the outcomes of the call are met. The last thing I'll talk about before we take your questions is some advice on how to prepare a successful submission. The first thing is that we want all applicants to make a strong case for why your project should be funded. So it might be completely clear to you why your technology is a leading solution for tailings and mine water management, but we want you to present to our review panel and to our board the strongest case possible. So it's important to start your proposal now. From now until the submission deadline is about 12 weeks, which is a bit longer than we normally offer, and we know it doesn't take that long to write a 20-page proposal. However, it does take time to forge partnerships, get internal approvals, and allocate resources. And again, for this competition where we're looking for an increased level of internal commitment and a demonstration of that commitment, as well as increased levels of stakeholder engagement, it's really important that those processes ideally are already underway and should be continued right through that submission deadline. Since all the submissions need to be completed through our online portal, please go there today to register an account if you don't have one already. If you already have an account, make sure you can go back and still log on, as oftentimes the passwords can be reset. Next, and I can't emphasize this enough, is to read the call for expressions of interest document. We get a lot of questions at our applications inbox, and I can tell you probably about 75% of the questions that Isabella and I respond to are somewhere in that guidelines document or in the template itself. So if you want to get a step ahead of the competition, I would say go and read that document thoroughly and make sure that it ticks off all of your questions before you come to us and you have to wait for a response. We do get high volumes of questions, both to this webinar and via our inbox, and so we can't guarantee your response will be as quick as if you read the document yourself. Similarly, if you have a project that's not eligible or might be a better fit for one of our other programs, it really behooves you to find that out early before you go through the work of preparing a proposal. Again, if you can come talk to us or read the guidelines and determine where you might fit better, that's a great thing to do, and we have a lot of different funding opportunities for folks beyond this call. So again, I really encourage you to think about that when you come and approach us. The next point is really an extension of the last one, and that is to really review the evaluation criteria closely. Again, those are in the guidelines document and are also sort of the structure of the template that you'll see when you're filling that out. Each of these criteria have different weightings and have a very specific definition with a number of questions or points for you to respond to within that template. While they're all important and all need to be addressed, I encourage you to put more effort towards those with a higher weighting. I can't tell you the number of projects that have been rejected because they think their greenhouse gas reductions section is obvious. They put a couple of sentences there. They don't provide the necessary detail for us to do our due diligence, and they're unfortunately turned away. So make sure you've addressed every section with an appropriate level of detail, again, to make the strongest case possible for your project. With that, that's the end of our content for today's webinar. So I'll throw things over to Isabella to moderate our Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So we have quite a few questions that have come in thus far. The first question is about timeline to securing an oil sands partner at the table. If we can maybe comment on this and whether there's any flexibility on this and really what we're looking for at that submission timeframe.
Thanks, Isabella. Yeah, it's a great question and very important for this competition. One thing we heard loud and clear from our engagement with both industry operators as well as technology developers is that technologies in this space have a lot of trouble getting from that piloting or initial R&D stage into the field. And the biggest gap there is securing a partner that can provide you with site access or at a bare minimum samples upon which to test your technology. We've seen that happen with our portfolio, and we know it will happen with future projects if that support is not there. So we will be looking very closely at all submitted proposals for the level of support that's being provided by operators. Again, at the initial proposal stage, that could look as simple as a letter of support from an operator, and ideally you'd have a representative from that operator attend your presentation if you're shortlisted. For each technology, depending on your market fit and alignment and how your technology integrates with the overall site, the extent to which that partnership needs to be firmed up and what that partnership will look like will probably look a little bit different on a project by project basis. But ultimately, at that time of submission, so September 24th, you do need to have something to show in terms of having spoken with operators or engaged with them and some support that will help you carry out your project, as well as subsequent commercialization.
All right. Another question here, wondering about any limitations with collaborations with researchers, particularly from experts outside of Alberta or Canada. Do we have any comment on this? So, from my perspective, I would say if you're a post-secondary institution, you're looking for funding from ERA as a partner. I would just encourage you to take a look at our eligible cost and expense guidelines first and foremost, just to make sure that the matching funds that you're providing are eligible for that ERA funding match. Typically, we require a one-to-one private or non-government funded match. So take a look at that. And then if you're applying from outside of Alberta, that's okay, as long as your technology is trialed on site and you do have that secured oil sands partner. Okay, moving on to the next question. Are there any limitations on expansion of existing projects?
That's a great question, Isabella. So typically our standard is that we don't want folks getting sort of multiple ERA contributions for the same scope. But what that means is that if your project is a new phase of development or a new phase of scale up, even if it's an existing project, you could still be eligible for funding under this call. Again, the key thing is if something's already received significant ERA funding, or I guess I should say any ERA funding, we're not going to provide additional funding for those same expenses or that same scope. So it's really good to think about your project in terms of phases. And if you're looking at an expansion phase on your project, or again, as I said, a next stage of scale up, that could certainly be eligible for this call.
Okay, we have another question or a couple questions here around what the scope of the challenge and scope of the technologies that we're looking for. So whether it includes SAGD produced water or in situ extraction processes or just mining based water.
Yeah, great question, Isabella. And this is something we contemplated quite a bit throughout our engagement with folks. I'll say this call is primarily focused on mine produced and affected water. However, to the extent that SAGD produced and affected water may require similar technology solutions and may ultimately be treated and disposed of in the same way, those technologies could be eligible. So again, it's probably going to depend on the specifics of your project, but you are going to want to make that strong case for transferability of the technology to, in particular, mine sites and mine water.
Another question is whether funding would cover projects that start a commercial demonstration and move to first of kind deployment. I would say absolutely. We are typically funding in the TRL level 7 to 9 space. So those are those later stage projects in the innovation space. However, your projects can start at a TRL 5 or 6, provided they finish within that TRL 7 to 9 phase as well. Are we eligible to bring in a technology partner from outside of Canada?
Absolutely. We're happy to see projects that focus on technologies or even partners that come from outside of Alberta, outside of Canada. Again, as Isabella said before, ultimately what matters to us is where that technology is going to be demonstrated within the project. Again, that should ideally be at an Alberta oil sands or tailings site. And in particular, this call has that additional requirement to have that committed partner at the stage of application. So again, if you as the lead applicant or as a key technology partner are from outside of Alberta, that's fine, but you do need to have that local partner to make that case for your project.
Another interesting question that's going to be pertinent, I think, quite heavily to this call is in-kind contribution matching from industrial partners. So, for all of our in-kind contributions, I would say they do have to be backed up by invoices and hard costs. But for this call, we will be looking at that. So, for example, if you're applying to us with a $10 million project, you're asking for $5 million for ERA and $5 million is in kind. That's probably not going to be eligible enough to make the cut. We are looking for the cash contribution first and foremost. And so I would just say, make sure you're looking at our cost guidelines, adhering to those as much as you can. Particularly for this challenge, we will be having an in-depth look at some of the financial risks of a project.
And the only thing I'll add there, Isabella, is that we've just updated those cost and eligible expense guidelines to expand how we talk about in-kind contributions. So again, please give that a read. There are some in-kind contributions that are equivalent to cash costs on the project. So for example, labor hours with timesheets and other similar expenses that are eligible. By contrast, there's some in-kind contributions such as access to sites or samples of water or tailings that we don't ascribe any in-kind value to and we won't be able to match. So again, it behooves you to just read that document and it'll give you the full lowdown on all of those individual line items.
Next question is about whether we provide any support to connecting technology developers to interested operators. For this challenge, as well as all of our other challenges, ERA does not play a matchmaking service. There are several organizations within Alberta that can help you connect you with different operators or others in the innovation space, but we do not play a matchmaking service. Okay, here's another question. If there's a project in progress, are there any other applications allowed or co-applicants that can apply to this call?
Yeah, great question, Isabella. Again, it really goes back to the scope that you're applying for ERA contributions to. So if you're submitting a proposal and half the costs in your project are from work that was done 2-3 years ago, work that's already complete, those are not going to be eligible costs for us to match, and we'd only look at go forward incremental and new costs. So that's driven by, again, our eligible cost guide and the fact that we are looking only for new and incremental activities that go beyond business as usual. What that often looks like is maybe a project has been announced already, but work hasn't commenced. That could certainly be eligible. But again, if you've completed some work already and you're looking for retroactive cost matching, that's not something we typically do.
Another question here, if an oil sands operator partners with a technology provider, will that affect the oil sands operator's own ability to have a successful application?
Great question. We are open to multiple applications and indeed to funding multiple projects from the same lead applicant or with the same oil sands operator partner at the table. So it's not strictly a one project per operator basis. And so we really want people to bring forward as many opportunities as they think are ready and well aligned with the call. We'd be happy to fund, multiple projects with the same operator if they happen to be the strongest opportunities that are brought forward. I will say, in particular, when it comes to thinking about how you strategically position your projects and the types of partnerships you should be seeking, we do see partnerships and consortia that loop in not just operators, but also technology developers, researchers, and communities, as I said before, as a plus for projects. So you will want to take that into consideration, even if it's largely an operator-led project, just building those bridges and engaging other folks that might have roles to play on the knowledge sharing side, on the research and development side, on the community side. Anyone that you can really loop into that consortium could help you make a stronger case for your project.
We've had a couple questions here specific to projects being brought forward or specific technologies. And while we won't be responding to all of those specific project asks, what I would say is take a look at our guidelines. There is a non-exhaustive list of technologies and solutions that we're looking for in this call. Most importantly, do they align with the outcomes of the call that we've put forward? So that is going to be most important. The second obviously important point is that you do have that oil sands operator on board when you do submit your application to us. Another question we've got, are fundamental research projects eligible or do they need to be commercially ready only?
Thanks, Isabella. Yeah, I wouldn't look at this as an either or. We're actually looking for projects that are sort of in the middle of the spectrum you described. So fundamental research can be a component of a project if there's actual in-field demonstration. So that might look like demonstrating a new water treatment technology, but then doing some fundamental research in terms of the water quality and the inputs and outputs of that process. But we wouldn't just be looking for fundamental R&D at a TRL 1, 2, or 3 without that connectivity to a later stage technology. What we're really looking to do here is take technologies that have already been proven from a fundamental science perspective, but need to be scaled up and demonstrated under Alberta conditions to advance them to commercialization. So it's really all about the progression within the project and where your project gets to. Again, that's something that probably sounds a little bit like a specific thing for your project. So I'd be happy to talk about that, on a one-on-one basis.
All right. We had a couple of questions around the timeline of the project. Given that we will be accepting project applications in the fall of this year, there was mention of a timeline to delay the project. So, what might that look like from ERA standpoint, and what is good justification for a project delay?
Fantastic question. So let me give you an illustrative example. All projects that are successful in this funding call will be notified of your success and the award of funding in January of next year, so 2026. From there, we usually have a 120-day period where we'll be working with you to meet any funding conditions, confirm your financing, and negotiate a contribution agreement for our contribution to the project. So typically, again, we'd be looking for that process to be complete and you actually kicking off project activities within 120 days. Now, when does the clock start ticking on your eligible expenses? It actually starts at the point where you're shortlisted in the process. So it could be all the way back to the fall of this year. At the other end of the spectrum, if you need to delay the start of your project, we'll still look for you to meet those funding conditions and negotiate an agreement with us, but we could agree in principle to a project schedule that starts, for example, in January of 2027. So that's what we say when we mean a delay of up to 1 year. Um, Again, the justification that you would have to provide for that would be really tied to the specifics of the site and the project that you're doing. So, for example, if the project needs to confirm financing from a board and a capital allocation process within an operator, and that process won't be complete until January of 2027, that could be a good justification. Likewise, if you're waiting for a facility turnaround or some scheduled maintenance to be able to implement the project, and so you obviously can't implement capital before that point, again, we could consider a delay based on that. So there's a number of scenarios in which that could happen. And again, it's probably best to talk with us on a one-on-one basis. I wouldn't get too hung up on schedule as long as you're sort of in the next 18 months from today, your project should be ready to start. We can work with you on what that actually looks like.
All right, we had another question here come in about our evaluation criteria and what that looks like. And so I will say that it is a little bit different than our typical calls for proposals. If you have applied to our calls or familiar with our calls, this call is a little bit different. So please pay attention to the guidelines as well as the application template. As Chris mentioned, in preparing your application, there's different headers in that template, including technology advancement, implementation and readiness, environmental performance, economic and ancillary benefits, stakeholder engagement, and commercialization and market fit. Quite a bit different than our typical calls for proposals based on the nature of the projects that we hope to fund through this call. And I will also say that if you do come and talk to us about your project, don't just assume that we know about your project and put a minimal effort into that application. Your template will be adjudicated by a team of experts. So just make sure that you are keeping that in mind and not assuming that they know about your project or your technology.
Yeah, great, Isabel. And the only other thing I'll add is just related to again, the weightings of the criteria and the outcomes that we're seeking. So Isabella just said we have criteria relating to emissions reductions, environmental outcomes, and socioeconomic outcomes. I'll say in particular for this call, because we recognize the complexity of the challenge we're facing, we really want to see projects that bring a comprehensive suite of benefits forward. So it doesn't behoove you to really focus only on one of those criteria at the expense of the others. We want you to address those all as fully as you can and really sell us on all the benefits of your project. So reduce liabilities, reduce cost, reduce emissions, obviously, and then reduced environmental impacts, water quality, land use, land impact, and air quality, and any other factors that are listed under those criteria. Anything that you leave out, of course, our reviewers are experts and they can sometimes understand the potential of your project just from reading it, but it's better not to leave that to chance, as Isabella said. So, please put everything down in writing.
Chris, I'm wondering if you can speak to the audience about what we consider as novel and innovative. So we had a question come in regarding whether a technology that's been used commercially outside of Canada but not yet demonstrated or proven in Alberta, would this still be considered eligible?
Absolutely. And I'll say right off the top, what we're looking for in this call is progression towards full scale deployment of a technology. So it's less about meeting some black and white novelty criteria and more about making the case for how ERA funding will advance the technology. So let me just say that right off the top. The situation you've described where a technology has been proven or commercialized outside of Alberta, outside of Canada, maybe in a different industry. We know there's mine tailings from all kinds of mining all around the world. If you have a technology that's already been proven in one of those contexts, but your project focuses on bringing it to Alberta and validating it here for our oil sands tailings and water in particular, that's a great example of a project we'd love to see come forward. We're all about attracting new technology and proving it out here in an Alberta context. So you do not have to be first in the world for your project to be eligible or to meet a novelty criterion. Again, novelty is one of those things we see people self-select out of the process for, and we'd much rather have you come talk to us and help us understand how your project and your technology looks, and we can give you a better sense of, yes, that probably meets our requirements, or no, that seems too business as usual or too incremental.
All right. We had a question come in about the team of experts adjudicating the applications, which is a really interesting question, and really important, I think, to tell the audience how we go about selecting a team of experts. So we actually just today released on our website RFQ for new reviewers. We do maintain a roster of reviewers. This is over 100 reviewers that we have with different levels of expertise and skill sets that we pull from based on the types of proposals that we receive in each call for proposals. Now, this is a mixture of internal and external experts, so internal to ERA and external experts as well, who've worked in the space, who are technically capable of looking at the technologies and looking at the solutions critically, and also those with a business development background as well. So not just technical, but we do also have that business development. And it's important to understand that we create these teams because we want to know what the potential of the technology is, as well as the potential of its applicability in the market and potential for it to actually get adopted into Alberta. Okay, so not seeing any more specific questions. If you do have questions that perhaps weren't answered, or if you have specific questions about projects that you're thinking of bringing forward, please come talk to us. Please email your questions to the applications inbox. We do want to prevent folks from emailing others on the ERA team. As per our guidelines, we do want all applicants just to contact and go through that applications inbox channel. And then once we receive that question there, then we can fan it out to our review team. So again, if you have unanswered questions after our webinar and after reviewing the supporting materials, including the guidelines and FAQ document that we have posted on our website, please send us an email. That's applications@eralberta.ca. Finally, we hope to have this webinar posted on our website by the end of this week. So good luck to everyone. We hope to see some strong submissions. Thanks once again, and have a good rest of your day.